This is a story you'll definitely want to hear to the very end. Chapter I. The air in the gilded cage was thick with the scent of money, a cloying perfume of old leather, beeswax, and the floral panic of 1,000 freshly cut roses expiring in their crystal vases. It was a place designed to make one feel judged, not by the staff who moved with the silent, spectral grace of undertakers, but by the very architecture itself. The ceilings were oppressively high, the chandeliers dripped with a cold, ostentatious light, and the damask wallpaper seemed to absorb sound, creating an intimacy that was more menacing than comforting. My husband Arthur's family, the formidable Albright clan, looked perfectly at home. They were carved from the same mahogany as the furniture, their faces set in the placid masks of those who have never known a moment of genuine want. I arrived, as instructed, at precisely 8. Arthur was already seated, a faint sheen of perspiration on his brow. His eyes darted towards me with the familiar, helpless plea. Beside him, his mother, Beatrice, presided over the table like a hawk-faced empress. Her smile was a blood-red gash in her powdered face, a masterpiece of cosmetic cruelty. My sister-in-law, a pale imitation of her mother, was there, along with her vapid husband. There was a single, glaring vacancy. My seat, presumably. The maître d', a man whose spine appeared to have been replaced with a rod of iron, drifted towards me. His expression was one of profound, professional sorrow. "I am so sorry, madam," he murmured, his voice a conspiratorial whisper. "It seems there has been an oversight. There is no 7th seat at the Albright table." A ripple of satisfaction, subtle as the shiver of a snake, passed through Beatrice. She did not look at me. Instead, she addressed the table at large, her voice carrying with the clear, cutting resonance of a ringing glass. "Oh dear, what a dreadful mix-up!" She picked at an imaginary piece of lint on her silk sleeve. "Eleanor, darling, perhaps it's for the best. The price fix here is, well, it's astronomical. Maybe a budget place suits you better." Her words hung in the muted air, a perfect, glittering jewel of malice. Arthur flinched, his gaze dropping to the pristine white of the tablecloth. The others offered faint, uncomfortable titters. They were waiting for my humiliation, for the flush of shame, for the quiet, defeated retreat into the damp London night. They had seen it before. But a strange and terrible levity seized me. It began deep in my belly, a warmth that spread through my chest and up my throat, emerging not as a sob, but as a laugh. It was not a giggle. It was a full-throated, genuine, and to their ears, utterly insane peal of laughter. It echoed in the hallowed silence of the gilded cage, turning heads at other tables. Beatrice's smile faltered, the red line of her mouth tightening into a grimace. I saw confusion, then fury cloud her eyes. I took a steadying breath, the laughter subsiding into a serene calm, and I wiped a tear from the corner of my eye. I let my gaze drift past the petrified maitre d', past the startled faces of my husband's family, to the far end of the room where a man stood watching from the shadows of a marble archway. He was tall, impeccably dressed, his handsome face a study in bored amusement. Our eyes met. "Forgive me," I said, my voice now steady and clear, a stark contrast to the hysteria of a moment before. "You are absolutely right, Beatrice. This place is far too exclusive for just anyone." I turned my back on them, on their shock and their sputtering indignation, and walked directly towards the man in the archway. The scent of his cologne, a custom blend of sandalwood and sin, reached me before I reached him. I did not stop at a polite distance. I came close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Julian, my dear," I murmured, my voice a low, intimate confession meant only for him. "I believe my mother-in-law has made a slight miscalculation. She seems to be under the impression that she is in charge tonight." I raised a hand and gently, possessively, straightened the silk knot of his tie. His eyes, the color of expensive whiskey, never left mine, but a slow, knowing smile spread across his lips. And then he looked over my shoulder, his gaze locking with the ashen, horrified face of Beatrice Albright, who looked as though she had just seen a ghost walk into her tomb. Chapter 2. A secret is a heavy thing. It is a stone in the pocket, a shard of glass in the soul. For 3 years, I had carried the knowledge of Beatrice and Julian like a concealed weapon. I had not sought it out. Discovery had been an accident, a cruel twist of fate on a dreary Tuesday afternoon when a canceled dental appointment left me with a void to fill. I had been wandering through Mayfair, feeling adrift and invisible as I so often did, when I saw her, Beatrice. She was slipping out of a jewelry shop, a place far too discreet for her usual ostentatious patronage. Curiosity, a lonely woman's vice, got the better of me. I followed. My confession, if I were to make it, would not be of malice, but of a desperate, chilling pragmatism. I watched from across the street as she met him, Julian, on a quiet corner. I saw the way he took the small velvet pouch from her, his fingers brushing hers with a familiarity that was not that of a shopkeeper. I saw the way she looked at him, not with the imperious command she used on her husband and son, but with a raw, pleading desperation. He was her master. I followed them to a small, private mews, to a door that opened into what I now know was his apartment, a place furnished and paid for by Albright money. I stood in the rain for an hour, the cold seeping into my bones, a voyeur to my own life's unraveling. The shock was not moral, it was strategic. In that moment, watching the rain plaster Beatrice's perfect coiffure to her skull as she finally emerged, looking drained and defeated, I did not see a cheating wife. I saw an opportunity. I saw a chink in the Albright armor. I began to collect evidence, not with the fever of a woman scorned, but with the meticulous patience of a lepidopterist. A photograph, taken from a distance, of them sharing a cigarette in a secluded park. A discarded receipt from a hotel in Paris for a suite booked in his name but paid for with the credit card I knew was Beatrice's private one. An overheard snippet of a phone call, her voice tight with panic. "You can't ask for more, Julian. There isn't any more." I held these fragments of her secret life, not to destroy her, but to arm myself. It was a life insurance policy in a family that wished me dead from indifference. I understood that their affair was not one of passion, but of transaction. He provided something she needed, and she paid for it, handsomely. Back in the restaurant, the tension was a physical entity. Julian, with a gesture that was both elegant and dismissive, had a table for one brought and placed, not at the edge of the Albright party, but at its head. "The best seat in the house," he announced to the room, his voice smooth as velvet. "For my most esteemed guest." He pulled the chair out for me himself, his hand resting on my shoulder for a fraction of a second too long. I sat, a queen ascending a makeshift throne. The family stared, mouths agape. Arthur looked as if he might be sick. Beatrice was a statue of frozen fury, her knuckles white where she gripped her wineglass. The wine was poured, the appetizers arrived, a symphony of color and foam on oversized plates. The silence at the table was deafening. "Delicious," I said, taking a delicate bite of a scallop. "Julian, you must tell me where you find your saffron. It has that same peculiar, almost metallic note as the kind we found at that little market in Provence. Do you remember?" I looked directly at Beatrice, whose face, already pale, seemed to crumble. She had told the family she'd gone to Provence with a school friend. I knew, from a discreetly placed travel itinerary I'd found in her desk, that she had gone with Julian. Arthur blinked, his brow furrowing in confusion. "You've been to Provence, Eleanor? With Julian?" I smiled, a sweet, secretive smile. "Oh, yes," I said, my gaze still locked on my mother-in-law. "Beatrice and I have so much more in common than you'd think." Chapter 3. The dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Every sentence was a carefully aimed dart, every memory a poisoned pellet. With Julian as my silent, smiling accomplice, I began to weave a narrative of intimacy that excluded everyone at the table except for my mother-in-law. She was my true audience. The others were simply collateral damage. I spoke of art, of the new David Hockney prints I knew Julian had hung above his bed. "It's magnificent, isn't it?" I mused, looking at him down the length of the table. "The way the light hits the water. It makes the whole room feel submerged. You were so right to hang it there. It changes the entire mood." Beatrice's fork clattered against her plate. She knew precisely which room I meant. I had seen it once, a glimpse through a half-open door when I had followed him home, just to be certain of the address. It was the room her money had furnished. My internal confession continued, a silent prayer to the god of vengeance. It was not just an affair. I had learned that much from my quiet investigations. An affair was too simple, too pedestrian for a woman like Beatrice. This was something deeper, a rot that went to the bone. From a private investigator, a man whose services I paid for with the last of my own small inheritance from my mother, I had learned that Julian was not just a charming gigolo. He had a past, a criminal record for blackmail and fraud, and Beatrice's payments to him were not just for companionship, they were for silence. He held a power over her that transcended the bedroom. He was the keeper of a secret so profound, so devastating, that she had essentially indentured herself to him to keep it buried. The affair was merely the gilded cage that contained the much uglier creature within. "Arthur, darling," I said, turning to my husband, whose face was a mask of bewildered pain. "You must have Julian tell you the story of how he acquired that old grandfather clock for the restaurant lobby. It's the most fascinating tale of a contested inheritance." Julian laughed, a rich conspiratorial sound. "Another time, perhaps. It's a rather complicated family matter." His eyes flickered towards Beatrice. She had not touched her main course. The perfectly cooked filet mignon sat bleeding onto her plate, an apt metaphor for her current state. She looked frail, ancient, the carefully constructed edifice of her authority crumbling with every word I spoke. Her daughter, ever the sycophant, tried to intervene. "Mother, are you quite well? You look terribly pale." Beatrice waved a dismissive, trembling hand. "I'm fine. Just a chill." I smiled. "Yes," I said, taking a slow sip of my wine. "The gilded cage can feel quite cold if you're not properly dressed for the occasion. One can catch their death." The double meaning hung in the air, thick and suffocating. Beatrice pushed her chair back, the legs scraping harshly against the parquet floor. "The powder room," she rasped, her voice a strangled whisper, and fled the table. I knew she was not seeking refuge. She was seeking a parley. The time for veiled threats was over. It was time for the final confession. Chapter 4. The powder room was a study in marble and madness. Gilt mirrors reflected 1,000 fractured versions of my face as I entered. Beatrice stood before one of them, but she was not fixing her makeup. She was gripping the edge of the vanity, her reflection a grotesque mask of rage and terror. The door clicked shut behind me, sealing us in the silent, jasmine-scented tomb. "What do you want?" she hissed, her voice stripped of all its drawing-room elegance. It was the raw, guttural sounds of a cornered animal. She spun to face me, her eyes burning with the hatred so pure it was almost beautiful. "Money? Is that it? Are you and that gutter rat trying to squeeze me for more?" I allowed myself a small, sad smile. My own reflection watched me from over her shoulder, my face calm, my posture serene. I was no longer the frightened girl from a lesser world. I was the arbiter of her fate. "Money," I repeated, my voice soft. "My dear Beatrice, you've spent so much time in the company of whores that you've begun to think like one. This isn't about money." I took a step closer, my heels clicking on the marble floor. The sound was like a clock ticking down. "I wanted a family," I confessed, the words tasting strange and foreign on my tongue. "I was naive enough to believe that marrying your son meant I might get a mother in the bargain. But you didn't give me a mother. You gave me an enemy. You gave me a rival for my own husband's affection, a constant, dripping poison of contempt." Her face contorted. "You know nothing." "Oh, but I do," I whispered, the confession turning dark and sharp. "I know everything. I know about the monthly payments from your private trust. I know about the apartment in the Mews. I even know about the first secret, the one before Julian, the reason he has so much power over you." She flinched as if I had struck her. Her carefully constructed composure shattered, and for a moment I saw the terrified young woman she must have once been. "No," she breathed. "Yes," I pressed on, my voice relentless. "I know about the baby, Beatrice, the one you had when you were 19, before you ever met Father Albright, the one you gave away so you could marry into this gilded cage of a family." This was the true secret, the one I had paid the investigator a small fortune to unearth. Julian hadn't just discovered her affair, he had discovered her. He had found her original sin. The blackmail wasn't about the affair, it was about the child. Julian knew where that child was. That was his ultimate leverage. Tears, hot and real, streamed down her face, carving paths through her expensive foundation. "What are you going to do?" she choked out, the fight gone from her. "Ruin me? Tell Arthur? His father?" I looked at this broken woman, this architect of my misery, and I felt nothing but a vast, empty pity. "Do?" I asked, my voice holding a note of genuine surprise. "I'm not going to do anything. You see, Beatrice, I don't want to ruin you. I just want the cruelty to stop. I want my seat at the table, literally and figuratively. I want my husband to be my husband, not your son. And from now on, you will treat me with the respect I am owed. I held her gaze, letting the finality of my terms sink in. We have a truce. You will end things with Julian, and I will keep your secrets. All of them. In return, you will welcome me into this family. Is that understood? She could only nod, her body racked with silent, shuddering sobs. She was a queen deposed, a tyrant brought to her knees not by a conquering army, but by the quiet, inexorable weight of the truth. I had won. I had secured my place. I turned and left her there, a ruin among the gilt mirrors, and walked back to the table to claim my prize. Chapter 5. Returning to the table was like stepping back onto a stage after a dramatic scene change. The light seemed brighter, the silence more profound. Arthur and the others looked up as I approached, their faces etched with a mixture of fear and confusion. Beatrice's empty chair was a silent testament to the coup d'etat that had just occurred. A moment later, she followed me, her face scrubbed clean of tears, but ravaged and pale. She sat down without a word, a ghost at her own feast. The rest of the meal passed in a dreamlike haze. I was magnificent. I was charming, witty, and magnanimous in my victory. I drew Arthur into conversation, coaxing a weak smile from his lips. I complimented my sister-in-law on her perils. I was the perfect daughter-in-law, the gracious lady of the manor, now that the manor was truly mine. The transfer of power was complete. Beatrice was a husk, staring into the middle distance, her life secrets held hostage by the very woman she had tried to discard like trash. When the dessert plates were cleared and the coffee was served, I knew the time had come for the final act. I picked up my wine glass, the crystal cool against my fingertips. I stood. All eyes turned to me. "I'd like to propose a toast," I said, my voice ringing with a newfound confidence. I looked at each member of the family, my gaze lingering for a moment on my defeated mother-in-law. To family, in all its complexity, and to new beginnings. I smiled, a brilliant, mysterious smile. Then I turned to my husband, my poor, clueless Arthur. "Darling," I said, my tone sweet and confessional, "before this lovely evening ends, there's one last little secret I think you should know, a final piece of the puzzle." I let my gaze drift down the table to Julian, who was watching me with an expression of profound, almost reverent admiration. He knew what was coming. This was the part of the plan he had shared with me, the final, exquisite turn of the screw. This was the secret I had kept from the private investigator, the one Julian had confessed to me in his apartment one rain-slicked afternoon when we had sealed our alliance. "Julian isn't just Mother's friend," I said, pausing for dramatic effect. The air crackled with anticipation. Beatrice looked up, her eyes wide with a fresh, dawning horror. She thought she knew the depths of her ruin, but she had only been treading in the shallows. "He isn't her lover," I continued, my voice dropping to a near whisper, forcing them to lean in. "That was just a masquerade, a performance for my benefit. Wasn't it, Julian? A way to draw me in." I turned my gaze back to Arthur, whose face was a canvas of utter incomprehension. "Arthur," I said, delivering the final shocking truth, I'd like you to properly meet your uncle." The silence that followed was not silence. It was the sound of a world ending. It was the sound of minds failing to grasp a truth too monstrous to hold.
"Julian," I announced, my voice clear and steady, a final pronouncement of judgment, "is the baby. He is the son Beatrice gave away all those years ago." The gasp from Arthur's sister was sharp. Arthur himself simply stared, his mouth hanging open. But Beatrice made a small, wounded sound, like an animal caught in a trap. Her eyes locked on Julian's, and in them I saw the dawning, agonizing recognition of the full scope of his revenge. He had not sought her out for money. He had sought her out for destruction. This entire twisted psychodrama, the feigned affair, the blackmail, it was all part of his long, elaborate, and utterly devastating vengeance against the mother who had abandoned him. My laughter at the beginning of the night was not the sound of my own victory. It was the echo of his. The smirk was wiped from Beatrice's face forever, replaced by the vacant, staring ruin of a woman who had just realized she had been dancing with her own ghost. The gilded cage had sprung its final, most terrible trap, and we were all caught inside. Stories are born from emotions. If this story evoked any feelings in you, share your thoughts. Every comment you make is a spark of inspiration for new stories about struggle, strength, and hope that does not fade even in the harshest reality.